there was a viral Twitter feed that's called Trudeau's Got to Go, and it's picking up a lot of steam. So they're getting afraid. Okay. So yesterday we had a Mishnah that seemed to be steeridic. We said if women are discovered in the house of the father when she was in Arusa, then it's incumbent on the father to bring proof that they were not there before the Kedushin and that it's not a Mekach Tos. On the flip side, if they were only found after the Nisuin, after the husband took in the wife, then it's incumbent on the husband to prove that those women were there before in order for him to be able to get out of paying ksuba, in order for him to have Mekach Tos. And the Gemara said that is totally in the machlokes that we had between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel if we follow her cheskas haguf. According to Rabbi Gamliel, the assumption is that she was not born with these women. So she has a cheskas haguf that she didn't have women. That's what Rabbi Gamliel holds, and that's the seifa of the Mishnah that says that if the women were found after the Nisuin, he has to prove that those women were there before, because her cheskas haguf dictates that they weren't there before. Now, once you hold a cheskas haguf, then it doesn't make a difference if the women were found after the Nisuin or during the Eresin. It will be the same thing. She has the same cheskas haguf. The Reish of the Mishnah that says it's incumbent on the father is because, according to Rabbi Yeshua, we don't follow the cheskas haguf to take money away from the muhsik, away from the husband. So therefore, since you go by the chazaka, it doesn't make a difference whether the women were found with a savia, like the Reish of the Mishnah says, but even if the women were found after the Nisuin, the Veis Baila, we still say Hamochi Mechaver al Haraya, and the Cheskas Haguf doesn't work. That was the first teretz that we learned to explain the Mishnah, which is difficult because we're actually saying that the Reish of the Mishnah is going according to one Amoyer, one Tana, and the Sefer is going according to another. The Reish of Rabbi Yeshua, the Sefer is Gamliel. Then the Gemara wanted to come up with the second teretz, which I believe was Rava, who said, really, we hold like Rabbi Gamliel. Sign the Reish, sign the Sefer. The reason why, even according to Rabbi Gamliel, we say it's incumbent on the father to bring the proof is because of a new svara of kan nimtzu kan hoyu. Since the women were found is still in the domain of the father, before she was in the domain of her husband, we say that's where they must have occurred. And therefore, kan nimtzu kan hoyu neutralizes her cheskas haguf. So, for the Gemara, if you want to say that's the case, so then why would there be a difference between the Reisha and the Seifa? The answer is simple. Because in the Seifa, where were the women found? They were found after the Nisuin, which was Bebeis Baila. So therefore, Kan Hoya, this is where they occurred long after the Kedushin, meaning he's Mechuyev to pay the full Ksuba because Nistap Chosadei. So then the Gemara challenged this teretz of kanim to kanhoyu from a brisa that says that if the brisa always elaborates and gives us some more detail than the Mishnah. So the brisa says if you found the woman after the Nisuin, the Beis Habal, where we say kanim to kanhoyu, it's incumbent on the husband to prove that the woman was there earlier. But the brisa says very specifically the husband has to prove that the woman was there not during the Eresin, but the woman had to have been there. He has to be able to prove that the woman was there before the Eresin. For the Gemara, if you hold kan nimtzu kan hoyu, all he should have to prove is that the woman was there during the Eresin. Once he's able to prove that the woman was there during the Eresin, he's now neutralized her cheskas haguf, because you would say kan nimtzu the kan hoyu, and therefore the Gemara has a kasha according to Rabbi Sfara that you say kan nimtzu kan hoyu. Why does the brisa say that when the husband brings proof that the women were there before the Nisuin, he has to prove that they were there even before the Eresin? Why isn't it enough for him to prove that the women were just there during the Eresin, and then you could say kanim to the kan hoyu? So the Gemara answered as follows, and I want to go back to the Gemara's teretz because we didn't fully finished the Gemara starts. So I am about 10 lines from the bottom on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Amar Le, smack in the middle of the line. Amar Le, it's right opposite the Dibra Masal Aval and Toises. Amar Le, Misha Nisarsa, once she was Nisaris, if he only proved that she had those women after the Erisin, that wouldn't be good enough. We have another chazaka in the mix. If we prove, even if he proves that the woman was there during the Erison, and therefore it should neutralize for Cheskos Aguf, we have another taina that enforces for Cheskos Aguf, and that is he made the Nesuin. A person would never make a Nesuin on a woman until he was sure that she doesn't have any woman. And since he did, the high Rav and Afayasu. So she has another taina. You know why you have to pay me Maksuba? Because you knew about it and you accepted it. So that other factor neutralized. Fact the Gemara. So if you have such a factor, then ihachi achaloitis aris nami. Even if he proves that the women were there before the Erison, we still have a taina on him. Pay, because you would have never. It's impossible you didn't know about it, and that you didn't accept it because we have a chazaka in Adam Shoysa because Elam came back. Ella Amrinon, because we have another chazaka. The other chazaka says, Ein Adam Mefayis B'mum. On the one hand, you have a chazaka, I wouldn't have married her unless I knew about it and I accepted it. On the other hand, we have a chazaka that a person would never accept woman. So we have all these contradictory chazakas together. In fact, Hachanami, chazaka Ein Adam Mefayis B'mum Ella Mefayis B'mum. So the Gemara here does the final answer. Elamisha Nisarsa, if he only brought a raya that the women were there after the Erison, even though it's still Beves Aviyah, you have two chazakas to say that she should be entitled to the full ksuba. A is Hamid Hagub al Chaskasai. That was the very first chazaka that we started with. And then we have a second chazaka of chazaka in Adam Shoysa because Ella M came by Kai, Vahira Vinafayasu. Even if there were a woman there before, he must have accepted it. What are you going to say? You want to counteract these two chazakas with a counter argument? My amrit chazaka ein adam mefayis b'mumunava. You want to say, you're going to say there's a chazaka that someone would never accept woman, so that should neutralize our two chazakas. Havachad b'makam tarti. You have one chazaka of a person who would never accept woman, but you have two chazakas saying that he did accept it. A is your cheskes aguf, and B is if she had woman before, he would have never taken it. And therefore, chada b'makam tarti, the chada b'makam tarti lo yamrinon. So that's why if he brought rayas only back to the shas erison, it wouldn't work. But achaloit desaris. But if he brings a raya that the women were there even before the erison, then Hamid Haguf al Chaskasai lo ikala. You can no longer say Hamid Haguf al Chaskasai because he's proven without a doubt that they were there before the Erison. So what do you have? Ma'ika chazaka they know them shoyse because elam kim baikai. So all you have is the chazaka that a person would never have made in the nusuin unless he was boidiker the high rav and the fayasu. He accepted it. So you're telling me that you didn't have the moon before, that's neutralized. The only time you have is that he must have accepted it. Well, countering that chazaka, I have one chazaka against it. Adrabah, chazaka another mafayis b'mumen. So now we have all these chazakas narrowed down to really one chazaka saying she should get paid because he must have known about it before and he accepted it. We have a chazaka that says that he shouldn't get the ksuba because there's a chazaka, a person would never accept woman, so he for sure would not have accepted it, and that remains now a suffix. You have one chazaka that's countering the other chazaka. So therefore, v'hamid mammon al chaskasai. Therefore, we're going to go basar the cheskas mammon. So when you have two chazakas against one, then you don't look at the muhsuk. You only look at the muhsuk once the other chazakas end up in a stalemate. Then you look at who has the mammon and you leave it where it is. So now we have two approaches to understanding our Mishnah. Either Tavra Misha Shanazu Lo Shanazu, the Reisha of our Mishnah is Rabbi Shua, the Sefer is Rabbi Gamliel, or you could say that the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Gamliel, but there's this new factor of Kan Nimtza, Kan Haya. And now we have a third terrace. Rav Ashi Omar, Reisha Mona La'ava B'yotcha. In the Reisha, the father married off his daughter. He is the one who would get the ksuba. If she comes with Rashish Min Erison, he is the one who gets the ksuba. So who is the Baldin? The Baldin with the husband is the father. The problem is the father does not have a Tainus Bori. The father doesn't have his Cheskus Aguf. It's her Cheskus Aguf. And therefore, he has to prove that the woman, in fact, came after the Erison. The Sefer Mother Libiyot. But once there's Nesuin, a woman is not controlled by her father. Now it's the Baladin are her and him, and she has a Cheskus Aguf, which Toshus adds to, which and she has a Tainus Bori. Let's see Rashi. Rashi's Rabashi Omar, Mahadu Nami Lu'ukmakula Rabbi Gamliel. He's also trying to say that the entire Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Gamliel. The Chazaka de Gufa Adifa. And Rabbi Gamliel's Shita is that you always look at the Cheskas Aguf. And she has a Cheskas Aguf. So Oibazoi, the safe is easy to understand. The husband has to prove that she had Mumin before the Kedushin, because she has a Cheskas Aguf. But in the ratio, why does the father have to prove anything? Why don't you follow her Cheskas Aguf? The ratio, she might have a Cheskas Aguf, but he's the Baldin. Kesubos Erison la'av. The Ksuba of Erison goes to the father. So it's like she's telling her husband, you owe my father money for the Ksuba. Her Cheskas Aguf will not help for her father. Why not? So there's a long Toshus, but Toshus adds, she could be a buri as to knowing when her mum arrived. He cannot be a buri. So therefore, a chazaka without a tainus buri doesn't work. And he's not taining buri because the father cannot be 100% sure when the mum came. And therefore, since the father is not coming with a tainus buri, he has to prove, the chazaka is not enough, he has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the woman came after the kedusha. So those are the three pshatim we have in the Mishnah. Eisvei Rab Acha Barei Rab Avi al Rab Ashi. Rab Acha Barei Rab Avi asked the following kasha of Rab Ashi. The Brisa says, but the Sefta says, Moider Rab Meir b'mumin hara'uyin lava ima mebeis avia shola avil havi raya. Rab Meir says that even if it's bebeis baila, if it's mumin haru'in lava ima mebeis avia, if it's common woman, it's still the father's responsibility. V'amai, why? Mana libiyotchahu. Once it's already after the Nesuin, it's her din with her husband, and she has a cheskas aguf. So why don't we say that her cheskas aguf should make it that she's not muchayiv to prove it? He has to prove that she had the woman before, because right now, she's the baldin. She's the one who's claiming her kshuba. She's a nesua. It's talk to Gemara, and we're speaking by a case where there is no cheskas aguf, but yesiras. She has an extra finger. She has an extra appendage. That's something that doesn't grow one day. That's something that must be from birth. So since that's the type of mum that she has, that she has to prove it. For Gemara, yesiras ma raya maisi. What possible raya? The Bride says if she has such a mum, she has to bring a raya that it occurred after the Erison. How could she prove that? It's impossible. An extra finger by definition means she was born with it. So tomorrow, you know what type of raya she would have to bring? Maisi raya dura v'nefayasu. She has to bring a raya that he was aware of it before the kedushin and that he accepted it. Okay, beautiful. So let's just review. We have three pshatim in the Mishnah. We have Taver B'Shishon Azul Shanazu. Reish is Rabbi Shua, Sefer Rabbi Gamliel. We have Rava that's all Rabbi Gamliel. But the difference is Kan Nimtu Kan Hoya. And the third shita is Rabashi. Again, the whole Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Gamliel. But in the Reish, the reason why the father has to bring a raya is because he's the Baldin and he doesn't have a Tainus Bori. Omer Rabbi Huda Omer Shmuel. Hamachlif Parah B'Chamor. Someone owned a parah and someone owned a chamor, and they each thought that the grass was greener on the other side. So they decided to do a chalipa. The way the chalipa was done is chalipa means if one person is kind of object A, object B automatically become nickness to person B. So what was done over here is the chamor was in Lakewood and the par was in Toronto. The deal was made in Toronto, so the Bala Chamor made Mashiach on the para, which means at the same instance, the Chamor in Lakewood is going to become nickness to the Lakeach. Well, they're each like, so we'll say Reuven and Shimon. Reuven owned the Chamor, and he made Mashiach on the para. Now Reuven's Chamor automatically belongs to Shimon, but Reuven and Shimon are both here in Toronto. They don't know what's going on in Lakewood. They're doing this transaction in Toronto. So then the Balapar gets into his car and drives to Lakewood, and he pulls up to the stable to get his chamor, and the chamor is dead. So now the question is, was the chamor dead when the Mashiach was done, since they weren't there, and then it's Reuven's chamor who died, or did the chamor die after that Mashiach was done, and now it's Shimon's chamor that died? When was the chamor discovered to be dead? After the Mashiach of the par. So the Kanin Sakam would dictate that it belongs to right. So let's see what it says. So this is what happened. The Ramachal par chamor umosh bal chamor par v'lizbek bal par lumshach chamor achamei chamor. Okay. So the halach is al bal hachamor lahavi raya. The bal hachamor, the person who made Mashiach on the para in Toronto, he has to prove shahaya chamoy rekayim b'shas Mashiach's para. He has to prove that his chamor was still alive when he made the Mashiach, and in fact, the lakeach of the chamor Shimon was koined, and then it died. I'm sorry. Well, there's a lot of things that are going to mix in over there. But the Tana Tuna Kala, how do I know that it's incumbent on the person who was Moshe the Para? We're calling him Reuben. How do we know it's incumbent on him to prove that his chamor was alive at the time? We know it from our Mishnah here of Kala. Okay, so now we're going to have to analyze exactly what do you see from our Mishnah of Kala. So Zok to Gemara, Hi Kala, which Mishnah of Kala and according to who? Ilema Kala b'veisavia. So let's see Rashi. Ilema Kala b'veisavia. Reisha de Mashnishin. Kala b'veisavia is the Reisha of our Mishnah, which states that it's incumbent on the father to bring a raya that these movements occurred after the Kedusha. Reisha de Mashnishin, Shabol Ladin ba'ida Arusa. The din Torah occurs while she's Marusa. The Katani and our Mishnah says, Va'av Tzarech Lahavi Raya. It's incumbent on the father to bring the raya. Usvir le Shmuel Karabalazer, and Shmuel holds a Karabalazer. So now we have three pshatim in our Mishnah we had. Right now, Rashi is stating that Shmuel, who said this halacha of a machal par v'chamor, and he's bringing a raya from the Mishnah. He's learning our Mishnah, Pshat Rabbi Lazar, which means that the ratio of our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that you do not follow the Cheskas Haguf. The Mukala B'trei Tanoi, he holds that the first part of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yeshua. Va'afilu nichnas al-chuppah islay l'tana the Reisha sha'av tzarech lavi raya. The Tana of the Reisha holds whether she is Arusa or Nesua, either way, because of a moitzi mechaver olav raya, she has to prove that the moment came after the Erison. V'afalpisha le'noilet sofek b'rshusay, even though the sofek was noilet in the husband's rishus. Even the sofek was not noilet in her rishus, the sofek was on the husband's rishus, because even after Nesuin, it's still incumbent on her to be able to prove that the women were not there before her marriage in order for her to collect her ksuba. Alma, what do you see from here? She may not collect money, the ksuba from him, misofik. She has to prove, in fact, that the woman came afterwards. Behind so how do we look at the parallel in this case? This Reuven who made the Mashiach on the poor cannot retain the par that he's attained through the chalipin, because the alfal gav shasavik b'shus chaveri noilad, even though technically the suffix is b'shus chaveri sharei kvarnasus mashicha, we already did the mashicha, and only then did we discover that the chamor died. Nevertheless, so it's already the paras in my rishus already. In order to retain my para, I have to prove that my chamor was alive at the time. So if that is what Shmuel is referring to when he's bringing the raya to his case from Kala, I have a problem. It's not a comparable situation. Why? Because Hasam Maisi Av Raya Umapik. In our Mishnah, the father is bringing a raya that the women were not there before the Kedushin, Umapik, and now because of that, he's extracting money from the husband. Haka, in the case of Machluf Par B'Chamor, Balachamor, Maisi Balachamor raya, the Balachamor is bringing a raya that the Chamor was alive at the time of, he made Mashiach on the Parah, Umukim, and he's keeping. So in our Mishnah, he's being moitzi with his raya. He's extracting the ksuba money from the husband. Shmuel's case is in parallel. Shmuel's case is that he's merely holding on to what he's a muksik on. He's already holding on to the parah. So that's not exactly an equal case. Zakrasha midami hasam dinu shetzarich lahavi raya. In our Mishnah, it's logical that the father has to bring a raya. He's trying to extract the ksuba money from the husband. From there, you want to make a parallel to our case. He already made the Mashiach on the par. He's holding it in his hands. And you're making him have to bring a raya to keep money? Who said he should have to bring a raya to keep something just because you're proving me that he needs to bring a raya to extract money from the husband? So therefore, let's say the raya is from the other case of Kalab Beis Chamel. So Rashi says that's Sefer the Misnisim. The Katani ala Baal Havi Raya, in the Sefer, it's the husband who has to bring a raya. The Rabbi Gamliel Omer, and we're still going with the original pshat that the Sefer the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Gamliel, where she has a cheskes aguf, and we're speaking after the Nesuin. The husband has to bring a raya that the women were there before. Upolag nami bereisha. In fact, Rabbi Gamliel will also argue in the Reisha, afilu nimtu beveis avia. Even if the women were found in the Erison, the loy noilat suffix b'reshusei, where the suffix was not noilad in the reshus of the husband, the suffix was not in the reshus of the father of the av, because he's still a mureses. Nami ala ba'al havi raya. We still say that the husband has to bring a raya lafkia koyach ksubasa, to prevent himself from having to pay her ksuba. This raya isn't a raya to be moitzi. We're saying the husband has to bring a raya. The husband's not bringing a raya that he should be able to collect. The husband's bringing a raya so that he could retain his money and he shouldn't have to pay ksuba. So surely this fellow who was moishech the parah and wants to keep the parah by claiming that the chamor was alive at the time, he has to bring that raya to be able to keep his parah. So just like the husband has to bring a raya to keep his money, so too the person who started off owning the shor, owning the chamor, has to bring a raya in order to keep the shor. Because he's trying to take someone else's things. It still wouldn't be a good raya from our Mishnah Shmuel's case. Because Hasam Baal Maisi Raya, the husband is bringing the Raya, Umarele lechazaka da'av, and thereby he's ruining the chazaka of the father, and therefore he's not mechuyev to pay ksuba. Haka Balachamor Maisi Raya, here the Balachamor is bringing a Raya, Umukim chazaka biyadei, and he's maintaining his chazaka because he's going to be holding on to the animal. So once again, there's no similarity. Let's see Rashi. You know why over there you need a raya? The reason why the husband needs to bring a raya in our Mishnah's case is because she has a cheskes aguf that these women were not there before the marriage. let's follow the chazaka, and the chazaka claims that the women were not present before the marriage. Hilchach Baal Ma'asi Raya, therefore the husband has to bring a raya, Sha'at Shaloi Tisaris Hayba. He has to prove that these women were there before the kedushin, so it's a mekach tos, umar lahu chazaka, and he's going to be weakening the chazaka. But over here it's different, because over here we want the balachamor to bring the raya and maintain the chazaka. Av cheskes aguf miafes koichoi. The cheskes aguf is miafes koich. He's not bringing a raya against the cheskes aguf. The husband in our Mishnah has to bring a raya against the cheskes aguf and say that the moment happened earlier rather than later. Here the raya that the balachamor is bringing is actually on the same side as the cheskes aguf. Av cheskes aguf miafes koichoi shekit shomer shekit toimar hamid chamor. If you want to follow the chazaka, and you said the instance of the chalipin, we're following the chazaka, akademis, well, b'cheskes chai tabidenu. The chamor definitely started off alive. So the chazaka is actually on side with the person who's bringing the raya. B'shus balapar. So then why would you force him to bring a raya from the Mishnah? In the Mishnah's case, I have to bring a raya because I'm going against the cheskes aguf. Here, you're asking me to bring a raya to support the cheskes aguf. So once again, what is the correlation between Shmuel's case of machlok par b'chamor in our Mishnah? Amar Nachman Yitzchak, kala b'vei sevia ulekedushin. Let's go back to the kala b'vei sevia. There, but a kala b'vei sevia, the father or she has to bring a raya. She has to bring a raya that the women were not there before. What was the problem with that? The problem with that is that she's bringing a raya to extract money. So how could you bring a raya just because the kala has to bring a raya to extract money, that the person who sold his chamor should have to bring a raya to retain, merely to hold on to the part? Just because you have to bring a raya to take money away from somebody, to take money out of a muhsik, that shouldn't say that you also have to bring a raya to retain your muhsik. So tomorrow ula kiddushin, you know what we're talking about? We're talking about the Mois Kedushin. Mois Kedushin, she has. He gave her a ring. He said, we're not talking about the ksuba. We're talking about the Muslim that she has. Now already, she's a muhsik. She has to bring a raya to retain the Kesef Kedushin. She has to bring a raya to retain the Kesef Kedushin, just like the fellow who made a Mashiach on the Parah has to bring a raya to retain the Parah. And don't say Aliba demanda Amar Kedushin Lav Lativunitnu. Don't say that this is going according to the Mandamar, that Kedushin is Lav Lativun, which means Rashi says, in order to retain the Kesef Kedushin, you need to bring a raya. Aliba demanda Amar Kedushin Lav Lativunitnu. Stam Kedushin, normally Kedushin is Lav Lativunitnu. It's not made to bury, to drown. In other words, that it's going to be lost forever. If the chassan dies, so let's say the chassan makes a kedushin and then he dies, his family is entitled to get the money back. Here it's a suffix kedushin because we don't know when the woman showed up. Therefore, she doesn't have so much koyach with them, because you see when he gives kedushin, it's not permanent. So Zozok to Gemara, even if you hold that if he gives the kedushin, it's irrevocable, it's permanent, and if he died, she still gets to keep it. Nevertheless, hani mila kedusha vadai. The kedusha tos, even if you hold normally that she always gets to keep the moish kedushin, even if it doesn't go through to the suit because the husband dies, here the whole kedushin is in question because maybe those women were there before the kedushin, and therefore imai si raya in. If he brings a raya, if she brings a raya, then she gets to keep her kedushin. If she cannot bring a raya, that the woman came after the kedushin, will actually take the kesef kedushin away from her. So not only will she not be able to collect tzuba, even the kesef kedushin that she has in her hands, she'll have to give back. The basic koiches is one of the stomachs of a cow, and it has an inner membrane and an outer membrane, and unless both membranes are punctured, it's not a treifa. So you found the needle in the thickness of the basic koiches. Mitzarechot ksher, if only one side is punctured, it's kosher. Mishnei tzadin treifa, if both sides are punctured, it's treifa. Nimtza le koyer dam. What if you found blood on top of the needle? Meaning we find a needle that has punctured both membranes, but we don't know. Maybe both membranes only got punctured after the animal died already. Maybe the needle shifted after the animal died. If there's blood on it, we know for sure this damage occurred before the shechita of the animal's a treifa. If there's just a needle there, but there's no blood, we'll say that chances are the break happened, the puncture happened after the shechita, so it's not a treifa. Huglat piyamaka. What if you actually see scabbing over the puncture? Now you know this occurred 3 days before the shechita. Why do I care if it's 3 days before? The answer is, if the shaykhid bought the animal from the ranch within 3 days, if we know that this wound happened before he bought it, now there's a mekach toas. Now the shaykhid who bought the animal from the ranch could say, hey, I bought an animal that had already a punctured stomach. Because when I opened it up, it had a scab. If it had a scab, it means it must have already happened before I bought it.
And every time you buy an animal, there's always a chance that it might become a fake.
The Gemara here seems to say you could.
Remember we had that problem? When we said before about Mecca place and a promise? Remember I confused the promise to a Mecca place?
Yeah, but vice versa, when it comes to animals, I guess there's an assumption that it's going to be kosher. I'm sorry? I understand that, but in the old days, when people bought things, there's, I guess, I don't know nowadays, where there's sometimes even a higher occurrence of trephus than not trephus. I don't know if that's how it worked in those days. It's clearly saying over here, loyal piyamaka. If it's loyal piyamaka, so we don't know when the nail punctured it. Hamochi mechaver el. Now it's hamochi mechaver el. She was saying, when you buy an animal, you bought an animal, and if it's trephus, it's your bad luck. In those days, it didn't work that way.
Who were you buying the animal from?
From a ranch.
Was the animal, was the ranch a guy, a yid? If it's a guy,
we're already talking about a yid who's coming to the Torah. A guy's not going to listen to the psak of person.
Right. Okay, so you bought it from.
He told me recently, like 85 calves.
So I don't know if it was like that. Notice. So let's see what it says. If we don't know, did this needle happen before the shaykhid bought it from the ranch or after? It's a mochi mechvel varaya. So it all depends on whether he paid yet. If the butcher has already paid the ranch, then he will have to bring a raya that this needle punctured the stomach before he purchased it, and then he can get back his purchase price. In other words, SOL. There's no way he'll be able to do that, right? Why would you say that? Baal Behema laisi raya. Let the Baal HaBehema bring a raya and say v'noikim b'deloi yoyiv tav chadami. Why are we saying hamochi mechavel v'raya and then the bride should fear, and then automatically if the tavach paid, he's the mochi. Maybe he didn't pay money, and maybe the seller is the mochi. Why are we assuming that the buyer is the mochi? My pascha. Why would you say that? Ella ki also Rami by Yecheskel Amar, he said, Lois hitzay sinu lahani chaloli de kail Yehuda Achi Mishmei Shmuel. Ignore all these rules that my brother brought down, quoted from Shmuel. In other words, Shmuel's halacha that we said that the person who's holding on to the shore has to prove that the chamor was alive. Don't listen to that. Hachi Amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said. Kol shenoilad sofek b'rshusay olav haraya. Whoever the sofek was noiled in his rishus, he has to bring the raya. So here we have the buyer of the ox. The buyer of the ox discovered that the stomach was punctured. So the issue was first discovered after the buyer bought it. So we say, too bad, it's on the buyer to prove that it had occurred before he bought it. translating that in the case of a machal parah b'chamor, I bought the shore and I made kinyan on the shore. Me making a kinyan on the shore automatically transferred the chamor into the other person's rishus. The other person only discovered that the chamor was dead after the fact. Since the chamor was discovered dead after the fact, olav haraya, he would have to bring a raya. So Shmuel, we don't paskin like Shmuel who says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. So we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda who says in the name of Shmuel that the burden of proof is on the owner of the chamor, that the chamor was alive at the time. Adrabah. You say the burden of proof is the person who bought the chamor because he's the one who discovered that it was dead after the Maaseh Chalipin, and therefore the person buying the chamor would have to prove that the chamor was dead at the time of the Chalipin. The Tanatuna Kala, and now it's very simple why we're learning it from our Mishnah of Kala, because in our Mishnah of Kala it's exactly the same thing, meaning she has to bring a riot to extract the ksuba money. So since we discovered, if we discover the mum in her rishus, meaning when she's still in the rishus ha'av, it's incumbent on, and now she's the moitzi, it's incumbent on her to bring a raya that the women were not there before the kedushin, so that she can collect the ksuba, which is exactly similar to this case. You found the needle in the folds of the Beis. So let's think about it. The loy yoiv tavach dami. If the tavach didn't pay yet, bal behema boy lasuyiraya. So we're quoting now a brisa that presents it the opposite way. It says the loy yoiv tavach dami. If the butcher did not pay yet, then bala behema boy lasuyiraya. The bala behema has to bring a raya that the needle was not there when he sold it, umapik, and then he can extract money from his purchaser. I'm sorry? That's not what we're saying now. Now we're saying that wherever the suffix was noiled, all of Laviraya. We just quoted a different psak. We're not saying a mochi mechaber all of Laviraya.
Why don't we?
Because there's other chazakas involved. So the question you asked, you could have really asked right at the beginning of the day. Why don't you say a mochi mechaber Laviraya, even though she has a cheskes of roof? Because when you have other chazakas paskening, it trumps hamochi mechaber all of Laviraya. So if you're going to say that it's always, we always say kol shenoilot savak b'shusay all of lahaviraya, well then, even if the butcher hasn't paid yet, he should still have to bring the raya. Why? Because the savak was noilot in the shus tavach. They didn't discover this needle until after the shchita, and that was already b'shus tavach. So idolayav dami tavach, idolayav tavach dami bal behema boy lasuya raya mapik v'mai sveka b'shus tavach isyalit. The suffix first came to light when there was b'shus tavach. Zok the Gemara ein chanami. The yoyiv tavach demei. It's speaking where the tavach has already paid. So for Gemara, my pascha, why would you say that? If the psak is hamochi mechavel of haraya, well then it means it goes both ways. If he paid, then he's the mochi. If he didn't pay, he's not the mochi. Why are you making an assumption that he paid and that he's the mochi so that it should fit with your narrative that the person who found the problem in his rishus, it's incumbent on him to bring your raya? Why would you say that? So tomorrow, because it's not a nukimti. Stamma denosa, that's the way it normally works. And we all heard of it saying no tiki, no washi, right? Kama de lo yoyiv inish yuzi, lo yoyiv inish chayusa. When people on a ranch are not going to release the goods until you pay me. So when we give a generic case of someone who bought an animal from a rancher, and then we say mochi mechavel of haraya, it's a given that the mochi mechaver is the purchaser, because there's no way the purchaser would have got his hands on that animal unless he paid in advance. So therefore, the hamochi mechaver, all of haraya, we assume as a generic is the buyer, because the buyer would have paid. Otherwise, there's no way the animal would have been released. The Chacham said by Mumun Shabbaseser, there it could be a question. But if it's Mumun Shabbagoli, for sure Savar Ukibol, because he knew about it before. Amr Rab Nachman, the nichba, I think the nichba means an epileptic, someone who has seizures. Is that what the article says? Kambubin Shabbaseser Dami. That's like Mumun Shabbaseser. Why? She can't control it. Zokt Rashi Levishin Nisheres B'yoim Zmano Milotes Ben Abrios. I guess it comes at a specific frequency, and therefore she'll make sure not to go out during those times. So therefore, it's called a moment of conversation, because how would anybody know? So that's if she knows when it's going to happen. So therefore, she can avoid ever being in public, and therefore it's called moment of and then he has to prove things. But if it happens at any time, and there's no specific time that it happens, then it has the status of moment shabagoli, and therefore you say suffer v'kibbutz. Okay, we'll stop here, and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. Unless you want to chop around the Mishnah, you have 2 minutes. We can chop around the Mishnah. You see how it's a man's world. What if the husband ended up having muman and you don't force him to divorce his wife? She doesn't want to live with a woman. You don't force him to divorce his wife. That's with small muman. And we'll have to see tomorrow what this is referring to. Okay, shkoyach, have a wonderful, wonderful day. 5:50. That's why I try to move faster because